Hi, and welcome to this episode of Rare Book Chat. I'm Jeremy O'Connor, and I'm here with my co-host,
Michael DiRuggiero.
We are rare book dealers. We buy rare books, we sell rare books, and on this podcast, we talk about rare books, but not our own.
And in this episode, we discuss the 1776 first edition of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, the 1859 first edition of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, the 1867 first edition of Karl Marx's Das Kapital, and with some talk about imaginary walks with David Hume, biblical boils, and whether shepherds eat mutton. Here's the episode.
Okay, Michael, I want to read you this quote about Karl Marx.
Okay.
The history of the 20th century is Marx's legacy. Stalin, Mao, Che, Castro, the icons and monsters of the modern age, have all presented themselves as his heirs. Whether he would recognize them as such is quite another matter. Nevertheless, within 100 years of his death, half the world's population was ruled by governments that professed Marxism to be their guiding faith. His ideas have transformed the study of economics, history, geography, sociology, and literature. He has this line. Not since Jesus Christ has an obscure pauper inspired such global devotion or been so calamitously misinterpreted.
Oh my gosh, there's so much in there.
Yeah.
Wait, first of all, that last line, though.
Yeah.
Not since Jesus Christ has an obscure pauper. So it's getting very specific in the Jesus Christ. But what did you say? Icons and monsters of the 20th century?
Yeah. So that's Francis Wheen in the introduction to his biography of Marx, published in 1999.
Icons and monsters. I can't get that out of my head. That's quite a line. It sounds like a
So I want to talk about the first edition of Das Kapital, which is Marx's greatest work, most influential theoretical work. I mean, there's of course the Communist Manifesto, but Das Kapital was more comprehensive work, and I think probably had a more lasting influence. And so anyway, I want to talk about the prices of Das Kapital.
Okay,
right?
Go for it. I mean, a book
Right,
that
'cause-
defined the 20th century deserves some discussion.
A copy just sold at an auction house in Berlin for $38,000 just this week.
I mean, that's not chump change.
It's not chump change, but I think it's cheap. You know, when I compare Das Kapital to, say, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, you see a really significant price discrepancy. And
Yeah, you definitely do. Yeah.
right. I want to ask you about that because given the enormous impact of Das Kapital on economic thought and all these, fields of human endeavor, politics, economics, all the rest, um, why is it that you can buy a copy of Das Kapital for under $50,000 and a copy of Wealth of Nations, which is a much more commonly seen book in the book trade, is going to sell, sells for, $100,000, $150,000, $200,000,
yeah.
right, easily. To bring it into focus, the difference in pricing between these two books. Earlier this year, an inscribed first edition copy of Das Kapital, signed and inscribed by Karl Marx, sold for $137,000 at auction. And right,
Mhm.
so okay, I mean that's a lot of money, right? But
Definitely, of course.
right,
For a book?
for a book, it is. But a first edition of Wealth of Nations, not too long ago, sold, just a regular first edition, not signed, just first edition, nice binding, beautiful contemporary binding, sold at Sotheby's in 2022 for $214,000.
That's not unusual for that book either.
It's not unusual, right? That's not an unusual price.
Okay, well, I have a couple theories without thinking about it.
Oh, I want to add some. I want to add a couple more details.
Okay.
I mean, there's only a handful of inscribed signed copies of Das Kapital that have ever appeared at auction, ever. Okay, a handful, less than 5, I think it is. I mean, it's not. It's not
there was
one.
one to a family member a while ago that really did well.
But so inscribed copies have ranged from like 137,000 this year to as high as 344,000 pounds in 2018. But still, I mean, compared to Wealth of Nations, these strike me as like quite low numbers.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that.
So I want to ask why. I want to ask, do you have any thoughts?
Because the market says so. How do you like
The
that?
market says that, but like, okay,
Adam
so
Smith would like that.
Adam Smith would like that, but I mean,
I mean, it's
it's
really the answer.
that's
But you're
it.
saying, why does the market say so? You wanna
Yes,
push a little
that's
more into
I
this? All right.
want to. Yeah, I want to speculate as to why are collectors more. Let me say it a different way. I have never spoken to a collector and they say like Das Kapital, I have to have it in my collection. But you will have a conversation with a collector's like, I have to have Wealth of Nations, right? Or
Yes.
another book that I want to connect this conversation to in a moment, I want to lead into is Darwin's Origin of Species, published around the same time as Das Kapital. Marx's Das Kapital, I don't think has the same appeal, that broad appeal.
It does not, and I have so many thoughts swirling in my head, I don't even know where to begin.
Begin.
One,
Just
I'll begin with the most shallow. How's
okay.
that?
Do I like shallow?
Das Kapital is just kind of an ugly looking book.
It's ugly. That's I
That's
want
the
to. Okay, so
thing. I mean, when you look
right.
at it in real life and pictures, you're like,
Yeah,
"Eh."
it's
And you look
ugly.
at Wealth of Nations, these gorgeous, large volumes,
Right.
usually in a beautiful calf contemporary binding, you think, "Ah, that's a book I want." I mean, just on
Right.
a visceral gut level, you put
Absolutely.
the 2 on the table, you
Absolutely.
don't have to know what they are, and you would say, I want the Wealth of Nations." Nice handmade paper,
Right.
big margins, it's just a beautiful book.
Right. I that's key. Okay. So aesthetically, but I mean, we also can think of other examples where a pretty unprepossessing, you know, item will command a huge amount of money. I mean, if it doesn't have to be attractive, I mean, a beautiful copy of Wealth of Nations is going to be a beautiful book. There's no such
Right.
thing as a beautiful copy of Das Kapital. It's a kind of mass produced, although only 1,000 copies, but still, book production in the mid 19th century was very different than what it was in the late 18th century when
Which is
Wealth of
funny to
Nations
think about. Book production was better, more luxurious in the 18th century.
in
You had
18th, right?
handmade
Exactly.
paper. Yeah, just, books meant more. I mean, the books are more beautiful.
Well, yeah, the Industrial Revolution hadn't happened yet,
You know, it
and
killed books.
well,
Well, it
but the
made books
industrial
more accessible. Okay, made books cheaper, more
made books more
accessible, etcetera. Yeah.
accessible, and it also led to turmoil and the societal economic distress that motivated Marx and others to embrace communism and to think of capitalism in a different way than Adam Smith did. Um,
I have other reasons.
okay, go.
They may not be good reasons, but they are reasons.
Let's just. I just want to. I
I'm
want to know.
brainstorming here because
Yeah.
a lot of thoughts are
Well,
coming into my
I
head
I mean,
here.
the reason I'm asking this question is because, I'm trying to locate like what drives desire and demand in the book market. I mean, you have comparable books in terms of their historical impact, and maybe Marx might even be greater than Adam Smith. We don't, but
I wonder if
d-
someone actually, if you substitute that initial quote that the 20th century is the story of Adam Smith, you might not blink at that either.
well, no, that's a fair point. And like when Adam Smith was writing Wealth of Nations, I mean, the real question was like mercantilism versus laissez-faire economics, and Smith laid out a case for free trade. It was very important in American history and important in economic history, obviously, and to like lay it out like this is why capitalism and free trade is better than tariffs and all the rest. But um, you're making
Yeah,
faces.
okay, I'm gonna go back to the point. The icons and monsters line in there,
Yeah,
that makes Marx,
a little bit radioactive.
yeah, less simple than
Yeah,
Wealth of Nations. Although, if you look at the horrors, child labor, industrial revolution, a lot of lot of bad things there from laissez-faire economics from that invisible hand. That invisible hand can cause trouble.
right, right. And I think
So, that shouldn't be as straightforward either. But we don't think of Adam Smith like that.
right. Well, Adam Smith, you think of the Enlightenment, you think of
Yeah,
this uh, scholar at leisure, and you think of his buddy David Hume,
I'm a
and
big fan of
these
him.
right, and these guys in Edinburgh, and they're like
Big fan of leisure too. I like to get more leisure.
right, but it seems at
I like to get an
least
invisible hand.
anyway. I think, I mean, to me, I've been asking myself this question, because I always just kind of understand like how does the book market work? How do collectors think? What is driving, these prices for books? I mean, so like, like this book is worth 50,000, this book is worth 5,000, this book is worth $500,000, and like, so what's behind that? And and I've been thinking about this Adam Smith, Karl Marx question, and I think like, well, Smith, you imagine Smith. in this, in the end of the 18th century. It's, it's the Enlightenment. It's
1776, little
right,
magical year. That's the
1776.
publication
Right,
of the Wealth of Nations. Always
right.
sticks in my head.
Okay, and you have like, it's a not yet industrialized world, and as you mentioned before, the book is beautiful itself, and you imagine Adam Smith going for a walk in Edinburgh with his friend David Hume, and
Yeah, I love
these,
David Hume.
and when you think about Karl Marx, you think of, a manifesto. So what is it? What's the first line of Communist Manifesto?
I think my image of Marx, and this is probably based on nothing, is this guy sitting in the British Museum, a little lonely, suffering from boils and skin rashes.
Right,
I don't know, just struggling. It's not. I look at that and go, "Oh, I would not want that life."
right.
That should have nothing to do with my feelings for the book, though. It sounds biblical, the boils.
Ween's biography is making a
Smith
biblical
may have had boils.
comparison.
I don't know.
I mean, so part of it is, I think you think like Karl Marx, he stirred up all this trouble, and you think, oh God, you
Yeah.
could have done without Lenin, you could have done without Stalin, like, like, I mean, is that it? But is that why?
Can't believe we're laughing at troubles. That's not really. Marx would argue that's a perversion of his thinking.
I know he would. I know he would.
So is that fair to take that out on the book?
So now we're getting into maybe like the subconscious of the book collecting trade, the world of book collectors, there's a resistance to figures who, important works that are not uh, that are not uncomplicated, which is the other way to say that that are complicated.
I'm not sure what you were saying.
I don't know what I was saying. So, like, I imagine Adam Smith on a walk in Edinburgh with his friend David Hume, and it is a very different world than Karl Marx, you know, like holed up in the British
Yeah, I'd like to be on that walk.
with Hume and
Yeah, I don't
Smith.
want to be in. I don't want to be in the British Library next to Marx,
Why?
who probably wouldn't talk to me.
And if he did, he would be in German, or not. He spoke English. Yeah.
I just don't think he'd speak to me.
No, he spoke. He was
No, I don't think he'd speak to me. I think he's
Marx.
shy, wasn't he? I want to be out in the air taking that walk with Adam Smith and David Hume. There's I have a little thing for David Hume.
Tell me.
There's an anecdote. This has nothing to do with the book, but when David Hume, an atheist, when he died, you know, it drove James Boswell crazy because there was no deathbed conversion. Like he fixated on it. He kept telling Johnson, "No, are
Mm,
you sure? What were the reports?" People just didn't report correctly. It freaked him out because David Hume was sound mind and
mm.
body
And so
until the end.
Boswell thought,
Well,
but
now
so
the body gave out, obviously, but
mm.
yeah, no, but this drove Boswell crazy. I love picturing that argument. Think about that.
So
Kind of obsessive
Boswell,
because that would shock Boswell's world. How
but
can a man he respects so much not have a deathbed conversion?
and was Boswell viewing it through the lens of like, why not? Like in a kind of Pascal's wager sort of.
No, he's a guy he respects. Yes, and he's in Boswell's opinion, he's making. I guess if Boswell's like, oh my gosh, maybe would that happen to me? Would I? Should I be like David Hume? But that would
So,
cause me to change everything I believe in.
right. So I think you're making my
It's very
point here for me,
unsettling.
Michael.
What?
You don't want to talk about Karl Marx. You want to talk about
I want
James
to talk
Boswell.
about
You
walking
want
in the
to,
park.
you want to talk about Boswell, and you want to talk about Boswell and Hume and Adam Smith
And
and
leisure.
like the 18th, the tranquility of the 18th century, relative tranquility of the 18th century, and not the ugliness and
Okay.
despair
Okay. When we all
and
studied,
tumult.
okay, the little thumbnail version of Marx is that line about wouldn't it be wonderful if you could be like a carpenter in the morning, a salesman in the afternoon. I don't think he said salesman. A thinker in the evening, philosophize at night. I'm not giving the right examples.
Right,
And I always thought about that. And you go, that would be amazing. Whereas
right.
Smith was like, oh, society's better once you specialize. Who wants
Well,
to
yes.
specialize?
What?
Who wants to
Excuse me.
specialize? So in that situation, I'm with Marx. I'm changing
Okay,
teams right in front of you.
you're changing teams. Okay, the division of labor concept that Smith introduced. For him, it was obviously like efficiencies, growth, productivity, etc. And for Marx, it was the opposite. It
Becoming a
was,
real full rounded person.
well, for Marx, yeah, it's like alienation, the commoditization of labor, all
Totally
those.
switching teams right now.
Okay, so now you now
What
so
if I can talk
does this?
about
Are you okay? Are you telling me now that you want to buy a copy? You would prefer to have Das Kapital to Wealth of Nations? Like,
Maybe intellectually, but not in reality. No, I want the Wealth of Nations.
I mean, so let's just describe The Wealth of Nations is published in 2 volumes. If it's a nice copy, it'll be large. It'll be
Tall,
quarto, right? And the
tall
margins,
quarto.
the tall quarto has to be margins, beautiful
You
margins,
can feel
beautiful
the print.
the typography, the smell of it, and when you turn the pages, there's that marvelous page turning noise, whatever you get with like the really
Kind of like
thick
that.
paper of the 18th century. I mean, books in the 18th century were better made than books printed yesterday. No, you're more likely, I think, a couple hundred years from now to have a copy of a book that was published in the 18th century survive than a public book that was published yesterday because the
Oh,
books are cheap,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Okay, so I want to be on that walk. Let's go back to that walk because now I'm
Oh,
feeling relaxed. I'm talking
okay.
about leisure, but I'm not talking about leisure. I'm at leisure talking about specialization. No one had leisure in the Industrial Revolution. All the fat cats
Oh,
did,
yeah, they did.
the
They
owners
did. Yeah.
did.
Right. And that's
Yeah.
Marx's point,
You once
right?
described a fat cat to me, and I like that description. I want to be a philosopher in the evening.
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to watch the Yankee game tonight. I'm hoping that they can beat Kansas City.
Well, you could philosophize while you're watching the game.
Yeah, that's true. See, here's my feeling, my theory, right? If you can buy a signed, inscribed copy of a book as important as Das Kapital for $137,000, I want to know why, right? And if a first edition sells for $38,000, that to me is like that's a question mark because if I think of the most important books of the 19th century, I would think of Das Kapital and Origin of Species. Okay, and if I think about the most important books in the history of economic thought, I think I would think in terms of Wealth of Nations and Das Kapital. Do you think does that resonate with you, or am I
I
just
would.
on a
It's
limb here?
interesting though when if you had said before we started this conversation, what is the most important book of the 19th century? And if I don't give it too much thought, I would say On the Origin of Species. And I don't think many people would argue with me. If you start arguing, then you get into a serious discussion. But
Right.
the knee jerk reaction is On the Origin of Species. Then if you said, Michael, what's the second most important book in the 19th century? Well, then I would pause and I would have to think.
Hmm.
Would I say Das Kapital? Maybe, maybe, but I might not think of it right away. Therein lies the problem with me.
Let me ask you this question: If a person did say Das Kapital, would you immediately start screaming, say, "No, no, 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 no"? It's
If you said Das Kapital, I would say, yeah, what a doofus. I didn't think of it. But I'm
doofus,
not sure it would have. I like the word doofus.
doofus. What's your
Kind of silly.
what, okay doofus?
I
Where'd you
don't
get
want to
that?
call myself anything too harsh.
Huh.
I call myself a
Doofus is
doofus.
like
I can handle calling myself a doofus.
okay, all right. Let's
Yeah,
keep moving. So if you would say I'm a doofus, you're a doofus.
I'm a doofus.
I'm not calling you a doofus. You're calling you a doofus.
Correct.
If you didn't think of Das Kapital,
Correct. And it's likely I wouldn't, so I would be calling myself a doofus.
the top price we're finding in auction records for an inscribed copy of Das Kapital is £340, £340,000 a couple of years ago, and but a more recent price is
That was inscribed to a cousin or family
to a
member.
cousin, right? To a family member. So that's going to impact the value. And then there's a copy at 137 from earlier this year, 137,000 euros, I think it is, or dollars is basically the same thing. And but then, I mean, keep this in mind: a fine copy, no signature of Argent Species. I mean, that has sold more than once in the $500,000 range.
560
560,
hit
right?
twice. Yeah, yeah.
What I'm saying is, Das Kapital is a cheap book when you compare it to Origin of Species. Hmm.
But what
Okay,
about
so
you? Why are you so perplexed by this?
I think it's cheap. I think it's and I'm thinking about like why do book collectors not love this book? And I think it's because, of all the awfulness that followed. And I should be mentioned here. I should mention here that when Das Kapital was published in Germany in 1867, it didn't really do anything. It had no impact. It was only when it was published in Russia in 1872, which was the first translation of Das Kapital, that it had any real impact. And there's an interesting story behind this. Do you know the story?
Uh,
I'm going to tell you the story. This is Tsarist Russia, 1870s, right? And there are censors. And the censor who read Das Kapital in Russia to decide whether or not it could be published thought this work is so obscure and complicated and unreadable and boring. Doesn't matter. Let's publish it. So they publish it. 3,000 copies sold out, like
wow, triple the
short
first
period of
edition.
time. Right. So, yeah, there's 1,000 copies of the first edition and 3,000 in Russia in 1872, and the Germans weren't very interested in it, but the Russians, the intellectuals in Russia, ate it up. They loved it.
Yeah, I'm being a little bit cavalier about Das Kapital. A book like that had to come along after the Industrial Revolution. Something had to happen.
Well, and, the same themes and the same ideas of alienation, urban distress, exploitation, so forth. I mean, mid 19th century, I'm thinking of Charles Dickens, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
that's what
yeah.
he's writing about,
So he's turning it
and
into a science. Marx is what's the brilliance
Marx is
of it.
turning into a science, right?
The same way Adam
And
Smith turned economics into a science.
right, but like book collectors love Charles Dickens, right? I mean, there's no
So here's another reason that Wealth of Nations might be more important in collecting circles than Das Kapital. The Wealth of Nations established economics as a real science. And Das Kapital, of course, treats it as a science too. But when you're talking about the foundational book for an entire discipline, it's Wealth of Nations. And I think in collecting circles, that means a lot.
Hmm. I'm not in a position to say this with any authority, but my layman's sense is that the scope of the impact of Das Kapital and Marx's thinking was kind of greater in terms of upheaval, in terms of revolution, and in terms of changing the way that people think about their economic condition. It's like
Yeah, but did you know that Adam Smith's theories led directly to Darwin? Darwin was a little bit obsessed with them.
I did know that, and in fact, Smith was an influence to both Darwin, and I do want to come back to Darwin. Smith influenced both Darwin and Marx. For Marx, it was the idea of stages of human development of human society.
Wait, wasn't it one of his stages being a shepherd?
Yes, he
I
was the
know.
first. Yeah, the first was hunter gatherer. The second was shepherd.
There was a point in my early 20s. There was this cover I
I
had
know.
of Keats'
I know.
poems. I've talked about this because I still think of missed opportunity. There
Uh,
was a cover of a Keats poems where this kid is lying under a tree with like sheep around him, and I'm like, that's the life I want. I'm gonna go to New Zealand and be a shepherd.
mm.
And then I realized that I'm afraid of sheepdogs.
Oh God. Oh,
Yeah,
too bad.
could have gotten over it though. I think it's too late for me to be a shepherd.
It's too late.
But look, he's denigrating shepherds in Wealth of Nations.
No, he's not denigrating. But the other thing is shepherds live forever. So it's I mean, the whole concept of it's too late. But if you're walking around like in this pastoral idyllic setting and you're walking all day long, the peace, you're eating berries. I mean, talk about the Mediterranean diet. And you'd be skinny as a rail. You'd have a walking stick and you'd have a little pup alongside you, the peace. I don't think you have to worry about it being too late because I
Would you
think
eat mutton though? Because you're trying to protect the sheep.
I don't know. I think we're off track here.
I
I
don't know.
want to go
He
back.
it was Adam Smith brought up the sheep.
I know. Okay, so the four stages. No, but this is really important. The four stages of civilization for Smith: nation of the hunters, shepherds, agriculture, and then commerce, a commercial society. And that um, commercial society, you have the advent of division of labor, which leads to all sorts of wonderful economic benefits in Smith's view. But for Marx, the opposite. He thought,
Totally
oh,
the opposite. Yeah.
right. But as you mentioned, Smith also was a huge influence on Darwin in that
Right.
right, in that the division of labor was a part of his formulating the idea of specialization of function
Even
in
specialization of organs, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's pretty wild.
All right, so now these are three we need to talk about in combination: Marx, Smith, and Darwin, because Darwin had put forward in the Origin of Species an entirely materialistic account of the origin of species, right? So that there's no hand of God in Darwin's view. There's just um, like stuff, right? And so for Marx, he thought, okay, so this is what are you smiling at me?
Stuff was a little vague.
Well, stuff. I mean, stuff in the sense that stuff like it's material.
It's a
It's a material.
system.
It's a system.
Do we know what Darwin thought of Marx then?
We sort of do. Well, we don't. But Marx. Okay. So this is books. Books are. This is why books are so cool. Marx sent a copy of the second edition of Das Kapital, published in 1873, to Darwin.
Ooh, I want that copy.
Right, with an
Yeah.
inscription on the part of his sincere admirer Karl Marx.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, Darwin didn't read it.
Get out of here. Oh, I was waiting for Darwin's letter that you found that in response.
No, he might have read a little bit of it, but
How do we know he didn't
most
read it?
because most of the pages are uncut.
Oh, see? Back to books. That is a great
It's
detail.
right. Okay.
Wow.
So, Michael, when
Well,
pages
I'm
are
still trying to
uncut,
absorb that. So
so
he gives him the book, a dedicated copy. And he's like, oh, great, thanks. On the shelf.
but Karl Marx is a nobody. I mean, he had published the Communist Manifesto, but go back to the Wien quote in the biography, the pauper. Like
I feel bad for Marx now. He must have been think about him. He must have been so excited sending this book to Charles Darwin. He's probably waiting for a response.
okay, but there's another
Checking the
possibility.
mailbox.
There's another possibility because Darwin's son stated at somewhere along the line that his father really struggled with German.
Oh, okay. That makes me feel
So
better.
there are some of the pages are cut. So Darwin's got his paper knife and he's flipping. He reads a few. Gets through a little bit of German, and then he maybe thinks, "Ah, this is too much,"
Or
and then he's done.
maybe he put this copy on the shelf to preserve it, bought a cheap copy to read.
Yeah, but
Reading
why would?
copy. That's what we collectors do.
Yeah, but in 1873, Das Kapital. In 1873, Das Kapital was not an important book. It was a book that was just starting to
I just
circulate.
love that idea of him saying, oh, this is going to be
Yeah.
valuable. I'm putting it on the shelf.
Yeah, no, let's put this one away, right? No, but in 1873, Das
Years from
Kapital.
now, they're going to describe it in an auction catalog as pages unopened.
Yeah. No, I mean Darwin must have been like, "Who is it? Why is this guy sending me a book? Who is he anyway? Who's Karl Marx? He's this guy, this troublemaker over
I
in
feel so bad that Marx clearly was waiting for a response.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when Marx first read The Origin of Species in 1860, he sent a letter to Frederick Engels,
Mhm.
December 1860, and he writes, "Although developed in a coarse English manner, this is the book that contains the foundations in natural history for our view."
Wow. And Darwin's thinking he's basing his system on Smith.
Yeah,
So it goes to Smith through Darwin to Marx. That's a remarkable quote. I had not heard that before.
yeah.
Smith to Darwin to Marx. Darwin thinks he's building on Smith. Marx thinks he's building on Darwin.
Well, Marx is also building on Smith though, because Marx is
Of
reacting
course
to
he is. You're right. He's
right. So
accepting Smith's premise and then seeing the dangers.
right, and he's right, and but also he is in a position to see the dangers because by
Because they happened.
1867, right, by 1867 you have the Industrial Revolution in full swing, and you have Charles Dickens writing books about Poor Oliver Twist and all the others, and
Yeah,
like
you have kids working 16 hours a day. There's no such thing as leisure time.
right.
Wow. I like
So
that, though, as Darwin being this kind of, I don't know, transmogrifying machine.
but the other thing about this, and we have to come back to it, is now. I mean,
I want all 3 books now if I'm a collector.
okay, let's play that game a little later, but I want to ask you this, right? So Marx, what was that face for?
I want to play the game now.
Oh, you want to? No. Okay, let's play now. No, no,
What's
no.
the
And
game?
I was like, which book would you rather have?
Oh, I
Okay,
want
so
all 3.
yeah, I want all three too, right? But it's a question of like, yeah, I definitely want to ask which do you want, the inscribed or the first or the whatever. Okay, that we
Okay.
have to come back to. But I also want to say this, you know, so we look at Marx from our position 2024. We know what Lenin and Stalin did with Marx's ideas, right?
Yeah.
Think about Darwin. I mean, he sat on The Origin of Species for 20 years because he knew it was going to be an
Yeah.
incredibly revolutionary, very
Yeah.
disruptive idea that he was going to introduce, right? I mean,
Right.
he was reluctant to publish this because it was such an assault on the established order.
Yes. Yes. And he knew it. So what's I always find interesting about that is Darwin's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when I publish this seismic book, this and that. And then he's about to get scooped. He's like, oh, I don't want to get scooped.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that
yeah,
pushes him over the line very quickly.
he was a capitalist, you know. he,
I
he was a leisured.
know. All my qualms and worries. Well, I don't want to get scooped. All right, so let's play the game. Now I'm going to ask you, which of the 3
Okay.
books do you
Well, so like, let's say, do you want?
forget? You're never going to resell it. You're never going to realize the money. So forget the cost.
Okay, we have Wealth of Nations in a.
Which do you want on a shelf that you look at and you go, wow, I can't believe I have that.
Well, I mean, we're comparing based on cost, right? Like, you're not going to
No, no,
sell
no,
it.
no, no, no. You're never going to sell it. Cost is irrelevant. You're never going to be able to realize any money from it. You get it for free and you can never sell it.
Oh, But we're comparing based on the idea that we're saying that a first edition of Origin of Species in the original cloth versus a first edition of Das Kapital inscribed and signed
Ooh.
versus that's the comparison I think we have to set up, because that's where this began. And just to
All
frame
right, all
this,
right, all right. Let's do that. Okay, sure. An inscribed first edition of Das Kapital in, a humble binding. A fine copy of On the Origin of Species in original cloth, that beautiful green cloth with the gilt in the spine,
Mhm.
and a beautiful copy, 1776 first edition of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations in contemporary calf. That's on the
So just
table.
before we do this, though, there's one more thing I want to mention, and that is I love Marx's handwriting. There's a kind of like a quirky wiggle to it that appeals to me. So I just didn't want to describe that. And he typically signs
Quirky
like in the
wiggle.
yeah, there's like a little wiggly in
Gotta
his
look at that more
handwriting,
carefully.
and like he typically will inscribe in the upper right hand corner of a page, and he's got some really nice warm inscriptions. So like that's a factor, right? Like
Mhm.
this the personalization.
That's a big factor. All right, hold
Okay,
on. Before you say
you
anything,
go.
no, I was gonna say we should say it at the same time on 3. I don't know what you're going to say.
No, not just you. Just I know what I'm going to say.
Yeah, but I don't know what you're gonna say.
Who cares? I'm not gonna change what I'm gonna say based on what
All
you
right.
say.
I want the origin of species.
I want the Das Kapital.
Okay, well, there you go.
Nobody wants the Smith. Why?
I don't know. I was just singing the praises of walking in the park with David Hume and Adam Smith.
I mean, the problem with Das Kapital is that it's German.
See?
No,
You haven't
but I
guessed.
want the Das Kapital because it's inscribed, and it's like Karl Marx signed this copy, whereas with the Origin of Species, it's one of 1,250 copies.
Intellectually, I totally agree with you, but emotionally, I want the origin of species. And you know what? A lot of collecting is based on emotion.
Yeah,
Can't get around it.
right.
Like that's the conclusion here, I think.
It's interesting too to think about. Are there any inscribed copies of Origin of Species in Darwin's hand?
No first editions inscribed in Darwin's hand. No.
Right. There's always the presentation
From the
inscription.
author,
Right,
secretarial.
secretarial, right. That to me makes me want the Marx even more, because Marx was not aloof. He would sign his own books. He's not like, "Oh, sign this book, give it to my friend," which is what Darwin did.
Intellectually, I agree with you. Put them on the table. If I'm really honest with myself, I'm grabbing that glistening green volume.
Yeah. I'm going for the Marx, but there's no way, but neither of us want the Wealth of Nations. Why? I mean, if you took photographs of these books and you said to somebody like, "Which one of these is a valuable rare book?" They're going to say Wealth of Nations, right?
Oh, Wealth of Nations is going to win head to head against a lot of books for me. Just
Yeah.
not the origin of species.
That's your book, huh?
We got to play
Fine.
more of these games head to head. Now I have to have something to dethrone